Our ancestors would think of us being wizards. Wizards that can create images out of nowhere. Wizards that can communicate around the world instantaneously. What would we think of our children's children? The world of the future is a world similar to mythology, a world of the gods. We may be able to alter ourselves. These superhumans would then colonize Mars and begin to colonize the universe. So we're talking about putting the brain into a computer or a computer into a brain. And so the two become the same, basically. This is possible, I think, within 100 years. Now let's take it to 1,000 years. So this is digital immortality, something which is attainable today, in fact. The other kind of immortality is much more difficult, and that is organic immortality, that your physical being lives forever. When people see the movie The Matrix, people wonder, is it really just a movie? Or maybe we are puppets. We are dancing in a world where somebody's pulling the strings and somebody hit the play button, and then the universe unfolds, and then you push the stop button and everything stops. Is that a possibility? Well, I think not. Because of the fact that quantum mechanics gives us different alternate universes, and this multiverse theory, therefore, is untestable. You don't know for sure whether or not quantum mechanics can give you all these different kinds of universes that are fictitious and that were all scripted ahead of time. In other words, it's an untestable theory. So I personally think that it probably violates quantum mechanics also. It violates the uncertainty principle. The theory of the matrix is a theory without quantum mechanics. It's a Newtonian type theory. So the universe is not Newtonian. The universe is quantum mechanical. And therefore, I think that we do not live in a matrix, that this conversation was not preordained. Let's say that one day you're allowed to meet your ancestor who lived a few hundred years from now, and you were to talk to your ancestor about airplanes, about rockets, about computers. What would your ancestor think? Your ancestor would think, you're crazy. What? Images from the ether? What? Journeying to the moon? What? Computers that can calculate 1,000,000 times faster than the human brain? What are you talking about? So our ancestors would think that we live in a world of science fiction. We live in a world of trains and rockets and atomic bombs that our ancestors would think is impossible. So if we were to visit one of our children, our great-great-great-grandchildren, a few hundred years from now, what would we think of them? You see, our ancestors would think of us being wizards. Wizards that can create images out of nowhere. Wizards that can communicate around the world instantaneously. That's what our ancestors would think of us, that we are wizards. What would we think of our children's children? We would think of them as being gods. And so, in other words, the world of the future is a world similar to mythology, a world of the gods. So our great-great-great-grandkids, they will live in a world where we can control life, where we can control matter and energy, things that are impossible today, but is the plaything of gods. The question that is often asked is, okay, if you're a scientist, then predict the future. Tell me what the future is going to look like. Well, first of all, I don't know. But what I can say is I think that we can make educated guesses. Educated guesses because we know the trajectory of physics and chemistry. You see, our ancestors lived in a world of magic, a world of witchcraft. There were no rules. There was no equations, no principles to guide them. Today we have the principles, we have the equations, we have the framework. That doesn't mean we can accurately predict the future, but we can make intelligent guesses. So for example, computers. We would know that computers will be quantum mechanical. And as a consequence, they would be millions of times more powerful than what we have today. And therefore, artificial intelligence could become a reality. In which case, we may exist in a world where artificial intelligence is the norm. The digital world is deterministic. The digital world is Newtonian. But a quantum computer exists in a world of quantum mechanics. It exists in a world of infinite states. And these already exist. We have quantum computers. They're not ready for prime time yet. But the ones that we've built so far are millions of times more powerful than any digital computer today. The problem is they can only work on one problem at a time. They're not all-purpose, like a digital computer today can add, subtract, do many things simultaneously. A quantum computer can only do one quantum mechanical operation at a given time. But they are, in principle, millions of times more powerful than any digital computer. And many people think that could be the future. The future is when we have quantum computers that are millions of times more powerful than anything on your desktop today. I think in 100 years from now, we will, our descendants, I think 100 years from now, our descendants will live like the Greek gods of the ancient times. They will be able to manipulate matter, manipulate energy, manipulate life itself in a way that we would consider to be magic. We would be able to manipulate our genome. Today, we can manipulate our genome one gene at a time. In the future, we'll be able to manipulate our genome perhaps as an entire quantity, not just one gene at a time, and able, therefore, to alter the course of life itself. So in other words, instead of using this technology to heal, to be able to cure diseases, we may be able to alter ourselves, to create ourselves to populate the universe. In other words, we may ultimately change the destiny of the human race itself. For example, if we colonize Mars, realize that Mars has a different gravitational field, different atmosphere, different temperature. Instead of trying to readapt Mars, why not readapt ourselves? To remodify ourselves so that we can survive in these environments around the universe. And so instead of looking at planets with hostile environments, why not alter ourselves so that we can survive in these? This is science fiction, but it's possible. One of the great frontiers is the human brain. Throughout history, the human brain was basically a black box. We're beginning to understand that there are mechanical analogs to the thinking process. And eventually, we'll realize that the brain is in part quantum mechanical. And this is where quantum computers come in. Quantum computers already exist. And they, in some sense, compute somewhat similar to what the human brain would compute if it's quantum mechanical. And so we're talking about a new era where we can change ourselves. Now, this means that the question of immortality is on the table. There are two kinds of immortality. One is digital immortality, and one is organic immortality. Digital immortality is when you create a clone of yourself that is mechanical, that has basically many of your memories, thought patterns, and looks like you. And the first generation of these digital immortals has already existed. What we do is we create an image of yourself that moves and talks, and you talk to this image. And this image accesses a tape recorder that has interviewed you and got your entire biography. This was done with William Shatner of Star Trek fame. For several days, he was interviewed about his life, his ideas, his thoughts, his history, and it was put into an image of him that will live forever. So this is digital immortality, something which is attainable today, in fact, rather primitive today, but it's possible to attain digital immortality so that you can have a conversation with your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids about life in the 21st century. So we're talking about putting the brain into a computer or a computer into a brain. And so the two become the same, basically. This is all possible, and it's been looked at. Of course, it would take centuries for us to be able to do this process, but it's possible. We can now connect the human brain to a laptop computer and have the laptop computer execute many, many patterns that are considered to be human-like. This has been done because there have been so many GIs wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq that the United States military has made it a priority to have these heroes of warfare be able to control a computer so they can walk, they can talk, they can perform many human functions even though they are functionally paralyzed. And so this is progress today, that using computers it's possible to interface the human brain with the laptop computer, which in turn can control your movements. This was done for the Olympics. The Olympics that took place in Sao Paulo, Brazil a few years ago was initiated by a man who was totally paralyzed. Here was a man totally paralyzed. He was put into a skeleton, a digital skeleton that was connected to his brain. Therefore, he was able to stand up and walk. He was totally paralyzed, but by thinking, he was able to control the exoskeleton, which would allow him to walk, and he initiated the World Cup soccer games in Sao Paulo, Brazil, even though he was totally paralyzed. Now that's today. In the future, we could become supermen or superwomen. Well, right now we're at the early stages of this. All we can do is take paralyzed people and give them back the gift of movement. That's today. In the future, we may be able to give them super movements. That is the ability to move things that only a robot could create. In other words, these people would be superhuman. And one possibility is that these superhumans would then colonize Mars and begin to colonize the universe because they are superhuman in their physique. This is possible, I think, within 100 years or so. Now let's take it to 1,000 years. How could we then explore the universe 1,000 years from now? I think it's possible that at that point, we'll be able to digitize ourselves, put our thinking process into software, put the software into a rocket, and shoot the rocket throughout the universe. Once the rocket lands on the moon, it then hooks up to an exoskeleton, and thereby allowing you to control an exoskeleton on the moon. You can also shoot these exoskeletons throughout the universe, and therefore be able to explore the universe mentally by shooting your consciousness throughout the universe.
Do you believe that we can ever create a consciousness machine?
It depends on how you define consciousness. There's no unified theory of consciousness at the present time. However, I do think it's possible to create an object that can size up its position, understand its location, understand its position in the universe, and initiate conversations with you. Is that consciousness? I don't know. There's no definition of consciousness that is universally accepted. Get a dictionary, look up the word consciousness, and you realize that there's no uniform agreement as to what it is. But I think in the future it may be possible to create a machine that is aware of itself, aware of its surroundings, aware of who is out there, and communicate, ask questions, interact with other beings. I think that is possible. Physicists have looked at outer space for guidance as to what alien technologies and civilizations may be like. One theory ranks them in terms of type 1, type 2, type 3.
Yeah.
A type 1 civilization is a civilization that harnesses all planetary energy. Anything planetary, they control. They mine all the light that comes from the sun. They control earthquakes, volcanoes, anything on the planet Earth they control. That is type 1. Type 2 exhausts the power of a planet, and they exhaust now the power of the sun. They just don't get a suntan, they control the sun. The entire output of the sun is used in their machines. This is a type 2 civilization, and we see this in science fiction. Star Trek, the Federation of Planets, would be a type 2 civilization. Then there's type 3. A type 3 is galactic. They roam the galactic space lanes. They're able to play with black holes, and that would be Star Wars. Star Wars is a galactic civilization. That would be type 3. Then the next question is, if they visit us, are they type 1? Are they type 2? Are they type 3? Well, type 1 civilization can basically just colonize a few planets in their nearby sector of the solar system. So flying saucers probably do not come from a type 1 civilization. A type 2 civilization therefore begins to understand the nature of stars. However, even stars do not allow you to approach the light speed that we need to go across the universe. A type 3, however, may allow you to access the Planck energy, is the ultimate energy of the universe. The Planck energy is the energy at which space itself becomes unstable. You put enough energy into the Planck, you put the Planck energy into an oven, and you then begin to find that within the oven, bubbles form. Anomalies in space-time form. And these bubbles, for the most part, simply pop in existence and pop back into existence. This is called the space-time foam, invented by Stephen Hawking. The space-time foam is when you heat up a microwave oven, let's say, to enormous temperatures to the point that space becomes unstable. And then if you exceed the Planck energy, universes may start to come about. In other words, this could be the origin of the Big Bang. The Big Bang itself was a bubble that reached the Planck energy and then began to grow and give you the Big Bang of today. That would be probably the province of a type 3 civilization, which may then use it as a gateway. Well, one problem with civilizations is that they may have a tendency to self-destruct. There are basically 4 ways in which a type 1 civilization can self-destruct. You have nuclear weapons, you have germ warfare, you have global warming, and you have artificial intelligence. So there are 4 ways in which you could have planetary destruction of a type 1 civilization.
You recognized AI as a distraction power?
It has the power of all of humanity's technology, and used in the wrong way, these technologies could be self-destructive. So there are 4 ways in which civilization can self-destruct using its own technology. I tend to be optimistic in the sense that the smallest unit of history is the decade. Now, when you look at history year by year, it's very depressing. Disasters form, governments fall. But when you look at history century by century, then you begin to realize, oh my God. I mean, just 200 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. We were dealing with steam power. We were dealing with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution for the first time in world history, using machines instead of your hands to create things. And that was just 200 years ago. And so I think that when you look at history through the lens of science and the lens of centuries, you realize that history has a direction. That history is going toward democratization. History is going toward the dispersal of technology that can relieve us of backbreaking work. And of course, the development is uneven, but the direction is clear. Technology has given us the ability to communicate, to share knowledge, and that is what the internet has done. The internet has democratized world society to the point that people that normally would be forgotten in a village and die without a name at all, these people can now communicate. They can learn. They can communicate with people around the world because they realize that their government does not have to be that way. If their government is repressive, on the internet, they can see that there are governments that are not repressive. And so they want to change. And so in other words, I think progress has a direction. So I would disagree with some people who say that science has no direction, that science can be used to destroy the world, or science can be used to liberate, but it has no direction. I tend to disagree. I tend to think that science does have a direction, and the direction is toward democratization, toward sharing of the fruits of this technology, which did not happen in the past. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be ups and downs. That doesn't mean there won't be wars, skirmishes, and problems. But when you look at history, decade by decade, century by century, you realize that there is a direction to history. Time is like a river. It flows in one direction, and it seems to be irreversible. However, along comes Einstein, who says, no, time is a river that has whirlpools. It can maybe fork into two rivers. So in other words, the river of time is dynamic. It's not just one river moving in one direction. But then the next question is, if the river of time can be altered, can you go backwards in time? Well, Stephen Hawking looked at that question and said that he thought that with wormholes, you could go forwards in time, but not necessarily backwards in time, using wormholes as gateways to another era in time. What was his argument? His argument was that if you go backwards in time, then eventually you go forwards in time, and then you go backwards in time, and you form a loop. The loop allows you to accumulate energy until it explodes. And so your time machine blows up. That was Stephen Hawking's argument against time travel. But there's a loophole in that theory. And that is, if you make one pass, not so that you make infinite number of passes accumulating energy so the machine blows up, but you just make one pass, then perhaps you don't have this problem of exploding universes, and then you can go backwards in time. This, of course, is still science fiction, but the mathematics seems to indicate that if you make a one pass backwards in time, then you can do it if you have enough energy. How much energy? The Planck energy. 10 to the 19 billion electron volts. That's 1 with 19 zeros after it. That is the energy, perhaps, of a time machine, the Planck energy.